Imagine this for a second. Your family has farmed a plot of land, like for generations. It's your livelihood, obviously. It's your legacy. And then out of the blue, it's sold.
Okay.
And you don't even know about it, right?
Yeah.
You didn't agree to it. This isn't just some hypothetical. This is the reality that tons of people faced. In the late Ottoman Empire,
Wow.
in this deep dive, we're going to unpack this article by Liat Portal. It explores these unintended consequences. When we say unintended, we mean like big consequences of Ottoman land reform, right? In the late 19th, early 20th century, particularly in Palestine. And we'll find out how these events still resonate.
Yeah.
Generations later.
It's crazy, right? Like when you think about it, what's often overlooked is how these like seemingly isolated historical events, they can have these ripple effects, right? Across time, shaping geopolitics in ways we're still dealing with them.
Yeah. And it's not always obvious, right? Like,
Yeah.
tossing a pebble in a pond. And those ripples just keep expanding outward. Okay, so to set the scene for everybody listening, let's talk about the Ottoman Empire's social structure.
Okay, so imagine this rigid hierarchy. You got this like massive gulf between the wealthy elite at the top and then the peasant class way at the bottom. The elite, they hold most of the land, while the peasants work it, right? Now contrast that with Europe, or even Russia at the time, where the lower classes, they had their own challenges, but they had slightly more access to things like education and just opportunities to learn different skills. This difference in social mobility, it played a huge role in the Ottoman Empire's ability, or I guess inability, to adapt to major changes. Like, think about the Industrial Revolution.
So they were trying to keep up with the times, but they had this like really rigid social structure holding them back.
Exactly. And then on top of that, right, they were dealing with this major financial crisis in the 19th century. They were desperate for solutions, and all eyes fell on the land, their most valuable asset. And this is where land reform comes in.
Ooh, land reform.
Yeah.
Okay, so land reform, I mean, that doesn't sound like a recipe for disaster necessarily. What went wrong?
Right. Well, the Ottoman government, they needed cash, obviously, and they decided to, try to modernize land ownership. On paper, it was supposed to create a more efficient system, but in reality, total backfire.
So this attempt to, fix things actually made things worse.
Remember that, deep-seated mistrust between the classes. The peasants were already wary of the government, right? And they saw these reforms as, just another way to exploit them. They were terrified of losing their traditional land rights. Like, what if they were left with nothing?
And on the other side, you have the elite clinging to their power and obviously their wealth. I'm sure they weren't thrilled about this either.
You got it. The elite saw these reforms, and to them, it was a direct attack on their centuries-old dominance. So the result, this volatile mix. You've got fear, you've got anger, resentment, all brewing across the empire. And this is where the Palestine case, it becomes really important.
This is where we see those ripples, right? Turning into, tsunamis. Because while this is all happening everywhere, Portal's article, highlights how Palestine became a focal point for all this. But before we get into that, can you remind everybody listening about capitulations? You mentioned them earlier, and I think it's really important to understand how they fit into all of this.
Yeah, for sure. Capitulations. Okay, so there were basically these agreements. The Ottoman Empire made them with European powers, and it granted foreigners all these special rights within their borders. The idea was, at first at least, to encourage trade. But they had this unintended consequence. They paved the way for foreigners to buy Ottoman land, which before that was really restricted.
Okay, so now we have, it's like a perfect storm brewing, right? Social unrest, economic instability. And now you've got these capitulations that are letting outsiders purchase land. So what happened next?
Okay, so imagine this. You're a peasant farmer. You're in Palestine. You've worked this land for generations. Your family has. And then suddenly you see it being sold off, often to these absentee landlords, right? Many of whom were Jewish buyers, taking advantage of these capitulations that we talked about. And it wasn't just about economics, right? This was deeply personal. You're talking about the disruption of a centuries-old way of life. And this, like Liat Portal argues, is where those seeds of resentment were planted. And those seeds, they continue to bear fruit generations later.
Wow, so it's way bigger than just some land dispute, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about this historical trauma with these deep, deep roots. A trauma that Portal says is still shaping the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even today.
And that's what makes her work so interesting. She's not just giving us a history lesson. She's connecting the past and the present. She's saying that this sense of dispossession that those Palestinian farmers felt back in the late 19th, early 20th century, it still echoes through generations. It's like fueling the conflict that we see playing out today.
That's a really powerful argument. Does she give any specific examples, like how does this historical trauma actually manifest today?
Oh, yeah, definitely. She points to those, ongoing land ownership disputes
Yeah.
where you have descendants of those original Palestinian farmers still fighting for recognition, right, and restitution. She also talks about how this historical dispossession, it feeds into this broader narrative,
The justice,
right? And that just fuels tensions, and it makes it even harder to even think about a peaceful resolution.
It makes you think about how long these historical events can last. Right. Even the ones that seem super far away to us now.
Yeah.
Like we're still dealing with the consequences. Like she's saying, we can't really understand today unless we acknowledge like the weight of the past.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting, right? She doesn't give these easy answers, but she asks this really crucial question. How do we move forward? Like, how do we break free from these historical chains, these things that are still binding us?
It's a question we should all be asking. And not just about this conflict, right? But about all the other historical traumas that are still casting a shadow on the world.
100%. Sometimes, if you want to build a better future, you've got to understand the past, all the complexities, and then hopefully try to reconcile with it.
It's definitely a lot to think about. So to everyone listening, as you go about your day, think about this. What historical events, right, maybe things you haven't thought about in a long time, might still be shaping the world around you?
It's a question worth asking. It might change how you see things.
And on that note, this deep dive has come to an end. We'll leave you all with that thought.